The first thing Madison Vale did as acting executive president was fire me in front of 12 executives, 2 lawyers, and a $4.1 billion deal she did not understand. She didn't even wait for coffee. At 9:18 on a Monday morning, Madison walked into the glass conference room on the 47th floor of Halvern Global like she had personally invented capitalism over the weekend. White suit, diamond watch, perfect smile, the kind of smile people use when they have never been told no by anyone who wanted to keep their job. Madison looked at my report and sighed. "Greta," she said, tapping one manicured finger against the folder. "Do we really need all this ethical certification drama?" I stared at her. The drama was the final compliance approval for Halvern's $4.1 billion infrastructure sale to Northbridge Capital. Without it, the deal could not close. Without my signature, the buyer could freeze the entire transaction. But Madison didn't know that. To her, I was paperwork with a pulse. She slid a sealed envelope across the table. "Your services are no longer aligned with our growth vision." There it was. 16 years reduced to one lazy sentence. If you're curious how one signature could freeze $4.1 billion and why Madison's first day ended with panic like this video, where are you listening from? And what time is it there? Because what happened next got worse. Her father, Leonard Vale, the CEO, sat at the head of the table pretending this was a professional transition instead of a family favor with better lighting. No one defended me, not the lawyers, not the executives whose careers I had quietly saved, not even Leonard, who once emailed me at 2:13 at Orsham, saying I had protected the company from a $300 million disaster. I stood slowly. Madison smiled. "Security will help you collect your things." I picked up the envelope and looked at the deal presentation glowing behind her. Then I said, "Madison, you just fired the only person authorized to certify that transaction." Her smile twitched. "We have lawyers," she said. I nodded. Lawyers read the clause. I am the clause. And for the first time that morning, the room went silent. Just so you know, this story is fictional and was created with the help of AI to make it more vivid and dramatic. I hope it still gives you real emotions and meaningful lessons to think about. Now, let's continue. As I walked out with that envelope burning in my hand, 16 years of Halvern Global flashed through my mind, not as memories, but as invoices no one paid. I had built the compliance system Madison called Drama. I wrote the anti-bribery controls after our Latin America division treated cash envelopes like office supplies. I rebuilt the supplier audit program when a factory in Malaysia failed 3 labor inspections. I forced executives to disclose conflicts of interest, which made me about as popular as a tax notice at a yacht club. For 16 years, I was the woman they called when something was about to explode, when regulators questioned our safety reporting. I spent 3 nights in a windowless room fixing documentation that should have been clean years earlier, when a pension disclosure nearly exposed a $180 million liability. I was the one who caught it before the board embarrassed itself in public. When a vendor lied about subcontracted labor, I shut down the contract and saved Halvern from a scandal that could have burned through half our market value. But success in compliance is invisible. If you do your job perfectly, nothing happens, no lawsuit, no headline, no federal investigator asking why your CEO needs a lawyer before breakfast. Madison never understood that. To her, ethics was a decorative word for annual reports. She had inherited a last name, a corner office, and the touching belief that rules were for people without family connections. 2 weeks before her grand entrance, I heard her tell a consultant, "Greta slows everything down." I wanted to say, "No, Madison. Gravity slows things down. I keep things from hitting the ground." Then, as security led me toward the elevator, one clause surfaced in my mind like a flare in the dark section 14B. Ethical continuity. If Halvern replaced its authorized compliance officer within 72 hours before signing, Northbridge Capital could trigger a special audit. Madison had not removed an obstacle. She had pulled the emergency brake herself. By the time I reached the parking garage, my hands had stopped shaking. That was a bad sign. Anger made people loud. Fear made people careless. I had spent 16 years teaching executives that the worst decisions in business usually began with someone saying, "Let's handle this quickly." So I did not handle anything quickly. I sat in my car, placed the termination envelope on the passenger seat, and breathed until the insult stopped feeling like fire. Then I opened my laptop. I did not call a reporter. I did not post a farewell on LinkedIn. I did not text employees with skull emojis, though I will admit the idea had artistic merit. Instead, I pulled up the transaction governance protocol I had helped write 6 months earlier. Section 14B was exactly where I remembered it. Ethical continuity. If the authorized compliance officer was removed, replaced, or materially restricted within 72 hours before closing, Halvern Global had to notify the board, the independent auditor, and Northbridge Capital immediately. Any final certification issued after that change required written reapproval from all three parties. Madison had not just fired me, she had triggered a contractual alarm bell with a manicure. I drafted the letter in the coldest language I knew. No emotion, no accusation, no after 16 loyal years. Just facts. My employment had been terminated at 9:18 a.m. I no longer held authority to certify the final ethics package. 3 compliance items remained unresolved: labor impact disclosure, supplier integrity confirmation, and pension protection review. Any substitute signature would require independent validation before closing. I sent it to the board secretary, Halvern's general counsel, the outside audit partner, and Northbridge's deal compliance officer. Every recipient was listed in the protocol, not one extra name. At 11:42 a.m., my phone buzzed. Northbridge Capital had issued a formal notice. Closing was suspended pending emergency compliance review. I looked at the message, then at the envelope beside me. Madison wanted speed. I gave her procedure. Northbridge's suspension notice landed inside Halvern like a brick through stained glass. At 12:07 p.m., Madison called me. I let it ring twice, not for drama, but because my hands needed to remember they were not allowed to tremble. "Greta," she said, too sweetly, "we need to correct the misunderstanding you created. I created a notice required by Section 14B. You created panic." "No. Madison, panic is what happens when paperwork meets consequences." Her voice sharpened. "Withdraw the letter. I can't withdraw a fact." By 2 o'clock, Halvern's public relations team had apparently discovered imagination. A draft statement reached me through an old friend in communications. It described me as a former employee resistant to modernization. Cute. By 3. Human resources had changed my termination reason from strategic realignment to performance concerns. Even cuter, if desperation wore perfume. It would smell like legal exposure. Unfortunately for Madison, I kept records the way other people kept family photos. 5 years of outstanding reviews, 3 executive commendations, 1 email from Leonard Vail thanking me for preventing a potential 9-figure regulatory disaster, meeting minutes showing I had warned leadership about labor disclosures, supplier verification, and pension obligations weeks before the deal deadline. Then Leonard called. "Greta," he said, heavy with disappointment he had not earned. "You are hurting the company that gave you everything." I laughed once. Quietly. "Halvern gave me a paycheck. I gave Halvern 16 years of protection. Those are not the same thing. You're making us look dishonest." "No, Leonard, I'm refusing to help you look honest." Silence followed, thick and expensive. He lowered his voice. "Be careful." That word should have scared me. Instead, it made me angry. I had been careful for 16 years while men like him confused caution with weakness. At 6:13 p.m., an email arrived from an address I didn't recognize. No message. Just an attachment labeled Project Lean Horizon. I opened it, and suddenly Madison's panic made perfect, ugly sense in every hidden line. If you think Madison Vale was right to pressure me into withdrawing a legally required letter, comment company first. But if you think she crossed the line by trying to bury the truth, comment truth matters. I want to know which side you would stand on if you were in that room. Project Lean Horizon sounded like a wellness retreat for consultants who charged by the adjective. It was not. The first page listed 6 Halvern facilities marked for post-close consolidation: Dayton, Bakersfield, Scranton, Tulsa, Mobile, Reno. I knew those names because I knew the people behind them. I had walked those floors, eaten vending machine lunches with supervisors, and listened to workers explain which safety fixes mattered more than any executive slogan. Then I saw the number: approximately 3,200 positions eliminated within 9 months of closing. My stomach went cold. The next section was worse. Pension obligations would be shifted into a weaker legacy structure, wrapped in language so polished it almost hid the damage. Almost. Retirees would keep benefits on paper, but future protections would be thinner, slower, and easier to challenge. In boardroom English, that was called risk optimization. In human English, it meant families would pay for someone else's bonus. And Madison knew. Her comments were in the margins. Do not disclose before signing. Union reaction risk. Compliance will overcomplicate. There I was, reduced to a footnote in her little masterpiece of corporate courage. The next morning, the independent audit partner asked to interview me by video. He began carefully. Ms. Chase, aside from your removal as authorized signer, are there undisclosed issues that could affect the transaction? I looked at the screen. For 1 second. I thought about staying narrow. My letter had already frozen the deal. I could protect myself, answer only what was asked, and let Halvern choke quietly on its own secrets. Then I remembered Luis in Dayton telling me, "You're the only person upstairs who remembers we have names," so I stopped being convenient. Yes, I said, I have reason to believe material labor, pension, and closure risks were intentionally withheld. The auditor's face changed. Within an hour, Northbridge expanded the review from signature authority to possible misrepresentation. Madison had tried to bury people under paperwork. I handed the shovel to the auditors. By noon, Halvern's stock had dropped 11%. I watched the number slide on my laptop with the calm expression of a woman who had warned everyone the floor was wet, and then watched them sprint in Italian shoes. 11% meant roughly $680 million in market value had evaporated before lunch. No fire alarm, no sirens, just red numbers, angry investors, and Madison Vale discovering that Wall Street does not applaud vibes. At 1:30 p.m., Halvern held an emergency investor call. I listened from my kitchen table, still wearing the same blouse I had been fired in. Madison's voice came through bright and tight. This is a minor administrative issue related to transition documentation. Minor, administrative, issue. 3 words executives use when the building is already smoking. Then an analyst from Morgan Keene asked, "If this is administrative, why has the independent auditor expanded the review to labor disclosures and pension obligations?" There was a pause. 4 seconds. In corporate silence. That is a confession wearing lipstick. Madison recovered. We are confident all material risks were properly contextualized. Contextualized. Another beautiful word. It meant hidden in a folder no one was supposed to open. By late afternoon, a revised disclosure memo appeared in the audit portal. Somehow, facility closures had become operational optimization. Workforce reduction became role alignment. Pension exposure became legacy benefit modernization. If cruelty ever attended business school, it would write exactly like that. Unfortunately for Madison, auditors prefer timestamps over adjectives. The original draft still existed in the system archive, complete with her electronic signature and margin notes. She had approved the harsher language, then softened it after my letter froze the deal. That was not clarification. That was a costume change after the security camera had already recorded the robbery. At 5:46 p.m., a board member I trusted called from a blocked number. "Greta," she said quietly. There's something you need to know. Leonard isn't protecting Madison. I looked at the falling stock chart. He's preparing to blame her, for the first time all day. I felt the room get colder. The board member's warning stayed with me all night. Leonard Vail was not rescuing Madison. He was staging her. By morning, I understood the shape of it. If the Northbridge deal closed, Leonard would praise his daughter as the bold new face of Halvern Global. If it collapsed, he would say she had acted beyond her authority on her first day. A convenient tragedy. Wrapped in a white designer suit, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Madison had been cruel, arrogant, and reckless. But even she did not realize she was standing where her father had placed the blame. Nepotism is touching that way. First they hand you the crown, then they make sure it fits over the chopping block. At 10:15 a.m., her legal team tried the obvious move. They claimed I had known about the labor and pension risks for weeks and failed to escalate them. According to their version, I was not a whistleblower. I was a negligent employee trying to save herself. It was a bold lie, bold. In the same way jumping into traffic is bold. I sent the auditor 3 escalation records, 1 memo to Madison, Leonard, and General Counsel, 1 compliance risk summary for the board committee, 1 meeting transcript where I said, clearly, that Project Lean Horizon required disclosure before signing. The dates mattered. 5 weeks before my termination, 4 weeks before my termination, 12 days before my termination. No one had answered. Then the auditor found the email that changed everything. Madison had forwarded my warning to her assistant, with 1 sentence typed above it, "Bury this until signing." There it was. Not misunderstanding, not transition confusion, not my attitude problem, which apparently had become Halvern's favorite fictional genre. Intent, by noon. Madison's lawyers stopped calling me careless. Leonard's office stopped taking questions, and the board scheduled an emergency internal hearing. This time, Madison would enter the same conference room where she fired me. Only now. The table was turned. The hearing was held in the same glass conference room where Madison had fired me. That was either poetic justice or poor scheduling. At Halvern, it was usually both. I sat across from Madison, Leonard, 3 board members, outside counsel, the audit partner, and a Northbridge representative who looked like he had already regretted opening his calendar invitation. Madison did not look at me at first. Her white suit was gone. So was the smile. Apparently, confidence had a laundry cycle. The board chair began. Ms. Chase, did you intend to interfere with the Northbridge transaction? I folded my hands on the table. No. I intended to follow the transaction protocol. Madison snapped her head up. That is ridiculous. She was angry because I terminated her. I was humiliated. I said, there is a difference. Humiliation is emotional. My letter was procedural. Her lawyer tried next. He suggested I had used confidential information improperly. I pointed to the distribution list in Section 14B. Board, General Counsel, Independent Auditor, Buyer Compliance Officer. Every person I contacted was named in the agreement. Not one reporter, not one competitor, not one dramatic anonymous account with a cartoon avatar. Then I opened the binder in front of me. I showed them the numbers Madison had tried to bury: 3,200 jobs scheduled for elimination, 6 communities dependent on Halvern payroll taxes, and more than $200 million in pension protections placed at risk by the post-close structure. Dayton alone would lose nearly 700 positions. Scranton would lose its largest private employer. Those were not efficiencies. Those were people with mortgages, prescriptions, and kids who needed lunch money. Madison whispered. You are twisting this. The auditor clicked to the final slide. Madison's email filled the screen. Bury this until signing. No one breathed. Not even Leonard. The Northbridge representative stood. Given this evidence, Northbridge is no longer merely suspending closing. We are evaluating termination of the transaction and remedies for misrepresentation. Madison finally looked at me. For once, she had nothing polished to say. Northbridge withdrew at 8:04 the next morning. The email was only 6 paragraphs. But it hit Halvern like a wrecking ball. The $4.1 billion transaction was terminated. Northbridge reserved all rights to seek remedies for inaccurate disclosure. Halvern would eat the breakup costs, advisory fees, and executive arrogance dressed up as strategy. By noon, the stock fell 7%. Finance estimated $37 million in preparation expenses were gone. Investor groups demanded a leadership review. Analysts used phrases like governance failure and credibility collapse. I preferred simpler language. Consequences had found the elevator button. Madison tried to save herself. First, she claimed she had relied on incomplete information. Then the auditors produced her margin notes. Next, she said legal had approved everything. Then legal produced meeting minutes showing they had asked for my compliance clearance. Finally, she suggested I had personal hostility toward the transaction. That one almost made me laugh. Personal hostility was not the problem. Documentary evidence was. Leonard's turn came faster than I expected. The board uncovered a note from his strategy call once the deal closes. Labor noise becomes Northbridge's problem. Labor noise. That was what he called the people who ran his factories, packed his shipments, repaired his equipment, and gave 30 years of their backs to his balance sheet. When the board chair read those words aloud, the room changed. Even executives who had spent years professionally avoiding eye contact looked uncomfortable. Madison was suspended pending investigation. Leonard was ordered to step aside from deal authority while outside counsel reviewed his conduct. Then the board chair turned to me with a smile. Greta, Halvern would like to offer you an expanded role. Chief Ethics and Compliance Officer, reporting directly to the board. 16 years ago. I would have cried from relief. That day, I only looked at the same table where they had let me be humiliated. No, I said. The smile disappeared. I stood. You don't get to destroy trust, then rehire it. Madison resigned 2 weeks later. The announcement called it a personal decision after a period of reflection. Corporate language is beautiful that way. It can make a public collapse sound like a spa weekend. In reality, she had been forced out, stripped of succession rights, and removed from every strategic committee her father had polished for her. Leonard lasted longer, but not much. After 22 years as CEO, he stepped down to support governance renewal. Translation investors had found the door and pointed at it. The Northbridge deal stayed dead. Halvern lost the $4.1 billion headline. But the company did not collapse. That was the part Madison never understood. A company is not a deal. It is people, contracts, machines, families, obligations, and names on time cards, under pressure from investors, unions, and the board's ethics committee. Halvern created a $220 million pension protection fund. 5 of the 6 facilities remained open. The 6th was not abandoned. It was converted under a phased plan with severance, retraining, and community oversight. For the first time in company history, worker representatives received seats on the Compliance Oversight Council. They asked me again to return. I declined again. Instead, I founded Chase Integrity Partners, a compliance advisory firm for companies entering mergers, acquisitions, and restructurings. My rule was simple. No deal was worth hiding the people it would hurt. 3 months later, I received a text from Louise in Dayton. Ms. Chase, we still have our jobs. My daughter still has health insurance. Thank you for remembering us. I read it twice. There was no champagne, no victory speech, no dramatic music, just a quiet kitchen, one glowing phone, and the peace of knowing I had lost a job but kept my name. Madison thought ethics could be fired. She learned ethics keeps receipts. Sometimes, doing the right thing feels lonely, especially when powerful people call it inconvenient. But truth has a way of standing up when everyone else sits down. After everything that happened, I walked away with 3 lessons. First, never underestimate the quiet person who protects what others take for granted. Second, a company's real value is not measured only in dollars, but in how it treats the people who keep it alive. Third, when you choose truth over comfort, You may lose a position, but you keep your dignity. Which lesson touched you the most? Share your thoughts in the comments, because your voice may encourage someone else who is facing the same kind of pressure. And if this story gave you something meaningful, please like, share, and subscribe to become part of a community that values courage, fairness, and truth.
Welcome to Boardroom Revenge Stories, a channel focused on workplace conflict, corporate betrayal, power struggles, and quiet justice. Our stories follow a structured workflow to deliver a consistent, immersive experience. We start by analyzing real discussions on Reddit, Facebook, Quora, and blogs. Next, we craft original scripts using AI tools like ChatGPT. We then use 11 Labs to transform text into high-quality voice and edit everything in CapCut for a smooth, cinematic finish. Thumbnails are designed with Canva, and every video is carefully reviewed before release. These stories go beyond entertainment, revealing how power truly works and how justice quietly unfolds.